So what do we got tonight, music-wise?
Tonight, we're going to talk about Florence Reese and basically the last 90 years of militant coalfield organizing.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. So here's the album that I want to share. It's called They'll Never Keep Us Down, Women's Coal Mining Songs.
Wow.
And it's traditional Appalachian folk music, and it's inspiring, and it's also very sad. It stirs the heart. And the song that I want to talk about is, actually, first, let me just read a paragraph from the back of the record.
Mm-hmm.
3 generations of Appalachian coal mining people are represented by the songs on this album. Songs which grow directly out of the experiences of trying to build a union, improve a community, establish equality for women in the workplace, or save a valley from the ravages of modern strip mining. Despite the time span of some 50 years from the period when Which Side Are You On was written until 1981, when the most recent of these songs was finished, there's a remarkable consistency to the themes and ideas which are reflected here. A concern for the safety and future of loved ones, an appreciation for the value of family, a hope that a labor union can provide safe working conditions, decent wages, and a dignified retirement, a sense of outrage that coal miners must fight so hard for the rights which so many other citizens take for granted, and a belief that working together can make a difference. So the song is, I'm guessing most people in the audience have heard it. It goes, which side are you on? Which side are you on? And it is probably the most prolific movement song in North America. I have heard this song sung in every movement space I've ever been in, remixed for every context, cultural experience. I've heard it everywhere from working with people fighting prisons to the immigrant rights movement to, of course, labor. It's covered by everyone from Talib Kweli to the Dropkick Murphys. It's almost like she's just singing it directly to you. All the other songs on the record are, guitar driven and collected. And there's just something really, I think, sweet about sort of hearing her as an elder just sing it,
I think so too. Musically, I play a lot of bluegrass and folk music. And there's something that's so powerful about the rhythm, especially of these great string instruments. But every once in a while, you'll hear some great records and it'll just be a song. And especially when it's just one person singing, it can really hit you directly. Mm-hmm. And I think in the traditional way that this song was sung too.
Yeah, it was based on a traditional Baptist melody. I think it was called Lay the Lily Low. And so It's one of the reasons why it spread so far. And so the context for the song is the Harlan County Coal War. So we're talking about Kentucky. And it was a period of about 8 years of really militant labor struggle that was actually across Appalachia, but sort of centered in Harlan County. And, the word war is not a metaphor. So yes, there was strikes, but in addition, there was bombings, executions, skirmishes, innumerable people killed over the course of these confrontations between labor and capital. About 6 different times, the state and federal troops were called out to actually occupy this community and break strikes and terrorize people. And it was complicated. There was a point in 1935 when they were actually called to protect miners from being beaten by local officials who were celebrating the passage of the Wagner Act. So it's actually a really interesting history, worth digging into. And the context is, so it's the Great Depression. People are poor to begin with. And the coal barons have a plan to expand national dependency on coal, which is one of the reasons why our country surged so much in fossil fuel production and contributed so much to climate change. The way they did it was by selling coal below cost. And so the way they could afford to do that was then by cutting workers' wages. And it started with a 10% cut from what people couldn't afford to live on anyway. And many people, a lot of towns in Harlan County, especially, were what was called company towns. So the company not only controlled the workplace, but actually owned people's houses, paid them in company money, which was basically monopoly money that you could only spend at the company store. So it's total control. And the first strike that had happened, was tremendous. It was like the ratio of workers that struck was like 6-1. And it was organized by the United Mine Workers. And they eventually lost that particular battle after a wave of repression. And they were left so weak that a communist union was able to form in its wake. Actually, it was called the National Miners Union, which had a brief stint. It was, they formed like 10 locals before they even got chartered. And one of the reasons that they were so successful is they were also providing direct relief of like soup kitchens and feeding people. It actually cemented in a deep, long socialist tradition in the region that continues to this day. And eventually the union died after the murder of an organizer named Harry Sims from the Young Communist League. But another lesson from that moment actually was most people were sympathizing with the union. And there were a lot of clergy that were also socialists, and they were freaked out by the anti-religion line that the communists in the party took. And so one of the things that eventually killed that party was them not meeting people where they're at and not actually connecting with the religious beliefs of folks locally. So anyway, it's a really interesting history that's worth digging into. The most militant labor history in the United States comes out of the Appalachian coal fields, absolutely. And I got to learn some of this history when I was organizing in the coal fields in the late aughts. So started building relationships with folks there at the end of 2006, around 2007. And it was a tremendous experience of getting to, sing the song, Which Side Are You On, around the campfire, and be taught this history by elders in this movement, particularly the late Judy Bonds, who, was like, we are still fighting the coal wars. And, they're doing it nonviolently, of course, although they were being attacked relentlessly. She was physically assaulted over and over again, death threats. When I met her, her dogs had just been strung up from trees the week before in order to intimidate her by company thugs. And so it was pretty amazing to me to learn that this was still going on in the United States. She actually went on to, she had a dream of 1,000 hillbilly march in DC, which eventually became a big mobilization in 2010 called Appalachia Rising. But I digress. Shout out to Judy Bonds. May she rest in peace. Anyway, I was there because there was a huge movement building up around what's called mountaintop removal coal mining. So it's a practice where they literally blow the top half of a mountain off and just scoop the coal out instead of doing what they used to do, which is dig a tunnel and then have people go in and mine the coal. And it was this incredible alliance because it, number one, of course, destroyed the local environment and the health of all the communities that lived in the areas that it was being practiced. It was a death sentence for the climate, but it also was a death sentence for workers because they were all getting fired, because you don't actually need many people to work for you if you can just lace some dynamite around a mountain and scoop out the coal. And so it was this incredible, unlikely alliance between labor, environmentalists, and local, families and health advocates. And so I was there supporting this organizing that was happening between, it was mostly ex-coal miners, but also the children of coal mining families. And they were organizing to try to, basically they saw the writing on the wall that coal wasn't going to be a part of our economy for much longer. And they wanted to secure good jobs in the clean energy economy for their families. And so in 2008, there had been an ongoing campaign against the Dominion Power Plant in Wise County, Virginia. It was a $1.8 billion power plant that, this is in a county that 25% of all the land in the county had been strip mined already. I mean, the devastation it looked like Mordor, it was unbelievable. And they had fought this thing through permits, through lawsuits, through council resolutions, and then finally through frontline nonviolent direct action. And that's where I got to also learn about some of the other history of, like, in 1921, the Battle of Blair Mountain, when coal miners went on strike and would wear, red bandanas around their necks, which is where the term redneck comes from. It was a way of signaling your allegiance to the Union, or at least that's the story they told. I think there's a more complicated history.
There's a lot of stories around it.
Yeah, totally. So anyway, we were working with an organization called the Southern Appalachian Mountain Stewards, and there were folks who had come in from the whole region. So we're talking about West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, into this southern region, southwestern region of Virginia. And what they were talking about is how mountaintop removal was a fight for cultural survival. And it taught me about, people there hated environmentalists. And I was there because I had come through the climate movement, and I was learning about labor in that way and learning how important it is to be supporting folks on the front lines who come from those communities. And through their leadership, there was this campaign against Dominion power. And on September 15th, this is 2008, we organized a blockade. It was a lockdown of the power plant. And so we woke up before dawn, and actually I ended up needing to coordinate the action because the action coordinator, Scott Parkin, was passing a kidney stone at the time. And so shout out to Scott, who's just an incredible mentor to me. We went out, folks locked down and sort of blockaded the place by locking themselves to barrels. And the barrels were connected to solar panels that were powering these like light up banners. And the banners showed the Appalachian Mountains with windmills on them because they were advocating for this thing called the Coal River Wind Project to give their community jobs. Mm-hmm. And it was just amazing to watch the sunrise with them, also singing the song, "Which Side Are You On?" while it was happening. And we shut the coal plant down for that day. But it was the construction site. It was in the beginning of construction. But on that same day, the CEO of Dominion Power was in San Francisco at a Bank of America investors conference, pitching them to invest in his project. Wow. And so we were sending pictures of the blockade and the lockdown to activists in San Francisco with a group called Rainforest Action Network, who snuck in to the presentation. And at that time, you could configure a USB jump drive to basically hijack a PowerPoint presentation. So the CEO is like on stage with this PowerPoint behind him saying why they should invest in Dominion Energy and coal. And suddenly behind him is this roll of all of these pictures of a blockade that's happening in real time with a timestamp on it. Wow. And he doesn't turn around. So he's still kind of presenting to the audience, and the audience is like freaking out, like what's going on? Because as bankers, their main assessment is risk. How risky is this investment? So the logic of the action was to communicate to the funders of the project, this is too risky to be worth your time. It was also, if you remember, September 15th, 2008 was the day the market crashed for 2008. And so the bankers were freaking out in the audience at that time. And I wanted to share that story because it was a good example of a dual strategy that was based in solidarity, where these two different movement sectors that are traditionally opposed, labor and the environment, found alignment about their campaign. One group was campaigning against the power plant. The other group was campaigning against the banks and they're funding it. And they found an aligned strategy that could work in solidarity together. And it ended up being part of a wave that stopped the construction of all new coal power plants in this country. It was through a mixture of finance campaigns, regulatory work, and frontline nonviolent direct action. And then from between 2008 and 2010, Bank of America and Chase developed policies against funding mountaintop removal coal mining. And then in 2015, backed off from coal entirely. And so that's where I learned the story of that song. Wow. And I'm forever grateful to my mentorship from those movements.
I mean, that's a powerful story and a real synthesis of of the lesson there. And I think that story really highlights something that's powerful too. It's like when you're able to bring those ideas together, you're able to be very successful too. Because I think, there's something that I experience sometimes with people who are like really focused on the environmental side, that they forget, for example, like the human sacrifice that went into coal and oil, for example. Don't get me wrong, horrible extractive industries and all that. But, you have generations of families who basically, they put their bodies on the line for this source. That, in a sense, there's something to like, take pride as like, you powered, America, you powered like society. And that's one thing I really liked. I was really highlighting a lot. For example, with Bernie's last campaign was like the idea of the just transition, where actually I think that there's like a lot of viability actually of being able to reinvigorate that kind of labor radicalism in areas like West Virginia and also areas of like Texas. And I don't know the on the ground dynamics in the Dakotas, but like, of people who sort of grew up around those communities, to say like, hey, let's be part of the future, and like, let's not let these assholes who have made a bucket load of money off of the exploitation of the earth and off of all these people's labor be able to get away scot-free, when the communities that basically created all this value get screwed and left behind in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was the people who were maintaining the labor organizing tradition that comes from the coal wars. Their primary concern was, how do we take care of our community and families into the future? And so they very much had an assessment of, we were born into circumstances where we are sitting on this huge, tremendous resource, and we're poor because of it. We're not wealthy because we're sitting on top of this resource. We're poor because of it. So how do we change our relationship to the means of production that are happening right here, and actually be able to get in on this new wave of energy production, which happens to be, in their case, wind?
Oh yeah, I bet you can do a lot of good like wind capturing in the West Virginia area for sure. So I know in Texas right now, like obviously a big push for solar, but also wind is something that's very viable there too. And it's been surprising to see even Republicans turn around on that. But I don't know the on the ground situation or scenario in West Virginia.
You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.